recently posted a couple pictures of some upgrades that I'd done. Cigarette lighter replacement with a USB port, voltmeter where the 4-wheel drive knob used to be, and some rocker switches. That's what the rocker switches look like after they're installed. I still have to fill in the sides right here, but if you pull the dash apart, it's hard to do with one hand. You start right here, pull this out. I have this wire right here. This wire right here comes from this, and it goes over here to this, and then this goes through the back of the dash to the radio wire, the wire that's controlled by the ignition. So on the back of here, there are these Phillips screws. Can't really see. There's these Phillips screws. There's 3 of them, and they hold this cigarette lighter port on there with that little door. Those 3 screws hold this fixture on here. So what you want to do if you're gonna do this mod, this USB mod, is take these 3 screws out, and I use the original ground from the old cigarette lighter, but for the original power wire for the cigarette lighter, I capped it off and ran this one to the voltmeter, and the voltmeter, like I said, runs to the radio. So I used the original ground, capped off the original power, ran a new power for this USB, and it's super easy. This is about how far you have to take it off. You don't even have to take the whole dash apart, but it's got this little nut right here on the back that screws all the way down and threads on, and it fits perfectly where this one used to be. This one just I had trouble getting this one off. There's these tabs, I think they're right here when they're inside that little door thing. I think I just broke those off, and this thing just slipped right out. What I did was I clipped right here. I left a little bit of wires in case for some reason I wanted to put this thing back in. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to though, but I did save it. But this and this are pretty much the exact same size. So this thing slips in there. It's kind of snug, but it slips in there fine. This door closes, you know, like normal. And it's just a perfect fit pretty much. And then the rocker switches, I don't know if you'll be able to see them. Not really. Anyways, I'm getting ready to leave them. I'm not gonna take the thing off, but basically the rocker switches I ran over to the headlight knob, so when the headlights come on, those auxiliary lights come on. That way they're not running all throughout the day, and it's all hooked up and everything. So what I did with this was there are 4 hookup wires. There's a ground, a battery, a ground for the light switches, or the switch lights down here, and then there's another ground. So there's a ground positive, which I hooked up to the headlight switch, and then there's a constant feed, which is when the ignition's off. This, you can still turn something on, and then this one is just another ground. So basically there's 2 grounds. I wired those 2 grounds together and made 1 ground. I made this one going to the headlight switch, and this one going to the constant battery power. So really, when you look at it, there's only 3 wires that you need to connect: is headlights, battery, ground. Another thing about this too, it has an LED on it. So I wired that in conjunction with this, and I wired this in conjunction with the radio. What I did to find that ignition wire for the radio, for when you turn the ignition on, the radio will come on, or when you turn the key back, the radio will come on. I used a test light to find out which wire turns on with the ignition, and I found it, and that's why I ended up splicing into. And so on, this is my voltmeter that I put in. There used to be this 4-wheel drive switch knob thing that was here. I just blacked it out right there. I took this knob off, and in the back of this thing, where the switch mounts to, there's like 2 or 3 nuts on the back. I took that little module thing off, and I had to cut and drill the back of this off, but this fits in there perfect. If you know, just cut it down and recheck the size, put this in, and if it doesn't fit, just trim a little more, put this in if it doesn't fit, and so on. But this fits perfectly in there. This fits perfectly in there. I figured I already have a SIG lighter down here, so you know, it'd be easier to just plug something in right there. And I ran that wire, like I said, right back here. So it's very easy. Basically, all you got to do is remove the housing from the back. There's those 3 Phillips screws. Remove the housing. This comes and slips out the back, so you can't pull it out the front. It has to come through the back. So you take those 3 Phillips screws off, and then the whole thing comes off with this inside of it. You take this out by these pins right here. You cut these wires right here. Leave the connector on here because you can't use a connector, this old connector, for the USB port anyways. And then you put this inside the housing. You thread that little nut on the back, and you gotta push it in a little bit to make it snug, but after it's all done, it's perfect. And then I used the old ground from the old SIG lighter to ground this. Then I ran a new hot wire from this going to the voltmeter, and from the voltmeter it's going to the radio ignition wire. So when I turn the ignition on, this comes on and this comes on, vice versa. So this and this share the same ignition power wire from the radio. The radio already has a fuse built into it, so there's no need to put a fuse there. And then this right here, when this all came, this was all one unit right here. This was all one thing. The voltmeter, the switches, and the USB, they were all one unit. They were about that big, about as wide as the din in there in the dash. So I cut a little bit off the bottom, trimmed it and ground it down. I cut some off the top, ground it down. Originally this and this was sitting right here and right here. So I completely modified this thing to fit in there. I have another video showing kind of how I did that. I can give to you guys if you want it. But yeah, that's just kind of a little rundown of everything I've done on my dash with these 3 components. Got any questions, just let me know and I will try and answer them.